Hi, Approaches to Tech students. Welcome to the second podcast that provides you with some feedback on your first assessment. And in this second podcast, what I'll do is I'll get you to also start thinking ahead for assessment 3. To do that, I'll look at some essay writing tips and exemplar paragraphs from the first assessment and get you to think about how to build a clear and relevant argument. And then I'll talk a little bit about accessing literacy support and getting some help with your essay writing, regardless of where you sit with your grade. I think it's important at some stage in your undergraduate career to access the facility, the resources that are available to you to improve your writing. But I'll start off with a question in this pod and get you to think a little bit about the marking criteria for this first assessment. What are the two criterion crucial to passing an essay, or at least passing this first assessment? I'll pause here for a moment, talk a little bit about why we do have marking criteria, and then come back to the answers. For one, we provide you with a marking criteria to justify the mark that you are given and the overall grade, but we're also interested in, of course, giving you some idea on how to improve on your work. When we were marking this assessment, we had 5 things in mind. Of course, we were looking at how relevant your answer was to the question, and we looked at how strong that argument was overall, whether you were in fact talking about the metaphor of a shadow, or were you veering and kind of, moving on to other literary techniques and forgetting about the metaphor entirely. We also paid close attention to your use of evidence from the primary text, and a lot of students were pretty good with this. They engaged very well with the primary text, the poem itself, and plucked out the necessary words and of course the necessary phrases from the poem to help try to support some of the claims that you were making. We're also looking at your ability to identify and analyze the metaphor and perhaps any other relevant techniques that kind of spoke into that metaphor. And we were also looking at the quality of the writing as well. The two crucial criterion that help to get you through or over the line in an assessment, especially an English assessment, it's the first and the last. Relevance to question and the written presentation are quite crucial. It's not to say that any of those other criterion are not, but those kind of often make or break an argument, and you want to make sure that you come back to the criterion at the end of your draft, even your final draft, and ensure that you are covering every aspect of them. Now, where you stand on the question will determine also your thesis statements. This is why the first criterion there is quite crucial. The thesis statement makes or breaks your argument. In a manner of speaking, it appears in your introduction, and you should probably already know this. It appears often, more than often, as that kind of final point before you launch into the first body paragraph. How strong your thesis statement is will determine your overall argument and the shape of your paragraphs. Each paragraph comes back to that thesis statement and expands on the claim you want to make. I've provided you with an example here of a student's introduction. And you can see that what he's done is he's kind of oriented the reader into that thesis statement. The thesis statement answers the question. Shadows are specifically used to convey these ideas because it can represent fear or profound loss, while at the same time act as a sort of consistent companion. Now, each paragraph then will go ahead and expand on this statement and the overall sort of points that were raised in the introduction. The student starts off by saying that Ali Cobby Eckermann utilizes shadows as a metaphor to describe the complicated relationship she shares with her biological mother. That's a great sort of start, in fact, to the question. Furthermore, the poem may also be read as a reflection of the Aboriginal heritage and the connection Eckermann has to the land as an Indigenous woman. This student, in fact, kind of split the body argument in 2 parts, really, in these 2 parts. First, kind of gave a close reading of the poem, focusing specifically on that sense of loss and that sense of fear that's instilled in the metaphor itself, and then went ahead in that second part of the argument and talked into some of the bigger ideas that we asked you to think about when you were talking about the poem. Try and build a clear argument to help structure your work. And in a 750 word essay, you might make 4 points. 4 points is probably more than enough, roughly about 150 words each per point. And that would be your body paragraphs. And each topic point will come back to an aspect of your thesis statement and expand in some measure. Longer paragraphs are better utilized when you can go very deep into a point. And if you choose longer paragraphs, then you should aim to maintain that throughout. Really, an essay should have even-bodied paragraphs throughout. So you don't really want to have, a 2-sentence paragraph, a body paragraph in one instance, and then, a 200-word paragraph in another instance. It's a very uneven argument, and that speaks to, in some ways, the unevenness of your essay, or the uneven structure to your essay. Here's an example of a longer body paragraph, and from the outset it contains quite a few relevant ingredients. It contains, first and foremost, structurally what we've asked you to consider when you are reading a text: to observe that text, identify and describe some of what you see, and of course interpret. So if you break this paragraph down, you'll almost automatically note that the student has provided you with a topic sentence in which he observes something about the question, and then goes on and discusses his main point by describing and interpreting it, and then deepens that argument by relating the poem to a bigger conversation. So by the end of the paragraph, he has in some ways provided a clear and substantiated way of thinking about the question, and he's done it without necessarily using secondary material. Why does this paragraph work? Rule of thumb. Okay, always show that you are reading the text and making your own mind up about the question. The observation sentence, that is the topic sentence, should really be in your own words, observing something that you see and that you think is relevant to the question in your thesis statement. Then and only then you should demonstrate how and what you have deduced about the poem fits into the larger conversations of the unit, or a secondary text if you intend to use it. And there were certainly some students that use secondary text, but it's most important that when we tell you you don't need to, and you're certainly not getting graded for it, that you stick to the poem itself. Show what it is that you've understood. And certainly go back to the lectures, as I said before, and guide yourself through the concepts that have been covered in the module. But most importantly, show us what you understand of that poem. Reflect, think hard, sweat it out, in other words. Why does this paragraph work? It works precisely because it's structurally sound and it's in depth, and certainly you need more word space to do that. It's also engaging with the bigger conversations of the module. The concepts of the module are kind of drawn on the mother's traditional name, the recognition of her culture, the kind of assessment of the pebble of her in my pocket. That last line is thought in 2 different ways, or is argued in 2 different ways, both of which are quite relevant. This is a case, a good case, or a good example paragraph that shows you that the horse has been put before the cart here. It's a good example of the student showing that he's thinking about the question and the poem and arguing the point, not systematically listing and describing metaphors or quotes, which regrettably too many students unfortunately did do for this assessment. So argue your point rather than kind of create a shopping list of points instead. The topic sentence develops on the assessment question, but what's also really good about this example is that it doesn't overstate biography or context, which we didn't really want you to do, but he still is quite persuasive and perceptive in his engagement with this very economical poem. And granted, there wasn't much there that Eckermann gets you to work with. She's very, very limited, minimalist in the way that she conveys her message. So that really requires you to do some digging. Let me say a few words here about written presentation as a criterion in your assessment. For this assessment, students in general demonstrated a conscientiousness in their writing that got them over the line. But even if you are hitting that 50 to 60 mark range, and even in those two examples that I showed you in this pod, which were in fact higher end examples on the marking scale and the grade scale, there is still room for improvement there where the writing is concerned. It's most likely, if you're hitting that 50-60 range, it's most likely because you're not persuasively answering the question and or struggling to articulate your points. So the two most often go hand in hand. So this is why I sort of explained to you that the criterion, the first criterion and the fifth criterion are quite crucial in making sure that you get over the line in an assessment. In assessment 1, we still saw many of you putting very little time into drafting an essay, then revising it for clarity, syntax, grammar, and typographical errors. If time is the reason why your essay is poorly articulated, then this is easily resolved. You simply need to sort of manage your time a little bit better, give yourself a little more time with an assessment. If genuine literacy problems arise out of not knowing how to fix them, then I highly recommend several avenues. Helen Basides is a literary support tutor. She's also an academic in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts, and she is designed to help students one-on-one with their assessment work, their assessment writing. If you have been advised to see an advisor in the feedback on your assessment, your first assessment, please take that very seriously. Do come and see Kate and I about where to go as your first port of call. But I've provided Helen Basides' email address here for you to access freely. And she's happy to see any student really who's looking to improve their work. There's also other avenues to consider. There is also the essay writing workshops that do take place at different intervals through a year. There's the 4-day workshop that's running in the inter-session break, and the 2-day workshop that's running at the same time on the 2nd to the 3rd of May. If for more details, you'll have to register. For more details, please do click on the website and do follow the registration application and get yourself into one of these workshops during the inter-session break. If you're more of a kind of introspective person and introverted and would prefer to have someone one-on-one, you can also go and see the Study Smart officers with your assessment, and they can sit down and tell you where you go wrong in your work and how to improve it, where to fix things up. They don't actually do the writing for you, but they do advise you on how to improve that work. And once again, you'll do this through the library, or you can click on this website and have a look and see what interests you most and where you can go for the Study Smart advisors one-on-one, face-to-face work with them. I'll leave it there and end this podcast here, and hopefully we'll get to see you now in classes in week 10. Enjoy your break.